Imagine you are driving down a long stretch of asphalt in the deep south. The sun is low, casting long shadows across the four-lane divided highway. You pass billboards for barbecue joints and fireworks stands, exit signs for towns you have never heard of, and rest areas with picnic tables under tall pine trees. The road is smooth and straight, and it seems to cut right through the ancient landscape as if it had always been there. But it had not always been there. Before this highway existed, the South was a different place entirely. The roads were narrow and winding, often unpaved. Travel from one small town to another could take an entire day. Getting from the mountains to the coast was an ordeal, and the idea of a family piling into a car to drive across the country was something that happened in magazines and newsreels, not in real life. That changed with one highway. One long, ambitious ribbon of concrete that reached across the American South like a steel arm, pulling the region out of its isolation and into the modern age. This is the story of that highway, the road that reshaped the South, for better and for worse. The road that brought jobs and tourists and suburban sprawl, but also divided communities and scarred the land. The highway that changed everything. In the years after World War II, the United States was a nation on the move. Soldiers came home, started families, and bought cars. The suburbs began to bloom around cities like Atlanta and Dallas and Nashville, but the roads were a mess. They were built for a different time, for horse-drawn wagons and local traffic. If you wanted to drive from Memphis to Knoxville, you had to follow two-lane highways that wound through every little town, with stop signs at every crossroad. The trip took nearly 10 hours, and if you tried to go from Charleston to Houston, you were looking at a journey of several days. The federal government knew something had to be done. In 1956, President Dwight Eisenhower signed the Federal Aid Highway Act, which authorized the construction of the interstate highway system. It was the largest public works project in American history. The goal was to create a network of high-speed, limited-access roads that would connect every major city in the country. For the South, the interstate system was nothing short of a revolution. It promised to break the region's long-standing economic isolation, to bring it into the mainstream of American life. And one highway in particular became the symbol of that transformation. That highway is Interstate 40. It stretches more than 2,500 miles from Barstow, California, to Wilmington, North Carolina. Its southern route slices through the heart of the old Confederacy, crossing Tennessee and North Carolina, dipping down through Arkansas and Oklahoma, then climbing into the high desert of the Southwest. But it is the segment through the South that tells the most dramatic story. Building I-40 through the Appalachian Mountains was a feat of engineering that required blasting through rock, spanning deep gorges with bridges, and carving tunnels through solid stone. In North Carolina, the route had to pass through the Great Smoky Mountains, a region of steep ridges and thick forests that had been home to the same families for generations. The highway crews faced landslides, floods, and the constant challenge of working in rugged terrain. It took nearly 20 years to complete the final section through the mountains. When it finally opened in 1990, it was celebrated as a triumph. But the celebration was complicated. For the people whose homes and farms and churches were destroyed to make way for the highway, it was a painful loss. Entire communities were uprooted. Historic black neighborhoods in cities like Nashville and Memphis were cut in half, and the natural landscape was forever altered. The story of Interstate 40 is really the story of how the South changed in the 20th century. Before the highway, the Southern economy was still largely agricultural. Cotton, tobacco, and timber were the main industries. Small towns dotted the countryside, each with its own main street, its own grocery store, its own gas station. People lived close to where they were born. They knew their neighbors. They went to the same church their parents had gone to. The highway changed all that. It made it possible for people to commute to work in the nearest city, so they no longer had to live on the farm. It made it possible for trucking companies to ship goods across the region in hours instead of days, so factories began to move south to take advantage of lower labor costs. It made it possible for tourists to drive from Ohio to Florida without ever leaving the interstate, so the Gulf Coast and the Smoky Mountains became vacation destinations for millions. The old, slow-paced South began to give way to a faster, more anonymous world. Shopping malls replaced downtown stores. Motels and fast food restaurants sprang up at every exit, and the small towns that were bypassed by the highway withered away, their main streets deserted, their young people moving to the cities. But the highway also brought something else. It brought the South into the national conversation. Before the interstate, the region was often seen as backward, as a place apart. The highway opened the South to the rest of the country, and the rest of the country to the South. African Americans from the rural South could now drive to jobs in northern cities or to better opportunities in the West. The interstate became the route of the Great Migration in reverse, as people moved back to the South in search of cheaper living and a slower pace. At the same time, the highway made it easier for civil rights activists to travel between cities, organizing protests and spreading the message of equality. The interstate system, built with federal money, was a tangible symbol of the federal government's reach into every corner of the nation. It tied the South to the rest of the country in ways that were both practical and symbolic. The highway did not cause the civil rights movement, but it certainly helped it move faster. Consider the city of Nashville, Tennessee, which sits at the crossroads of several interstates, including I-40. In the 1950s, Nashville was a quiet state capital known for its Music Row and its universities, but it was still deeply segregated. The construction of I-40 cut directly through the heart of the city's African American community, the historic district of North Nashville. Homes were demolished, churches were torn down, and a thriving black business district was split in two. The highway became a physical barrier, separating black neighborhoods from the downtown white establishments. This was not an accident. Highway planners across the country often routed interstates through poor and minority neighborhoods, using the excuse of urban renewal to clear out what they called blight. The same thing happened in Memphis, where I-40 plowed through the black community of Binghamton. In Atlanta, I-75 and 85 carved up black neighborhoods like Summerhill. The highway, in many ways, reinforced the very racial divisions that the civil rights movement was trying to erase. It was a double-edged sword. It brought economic opportunity, but it also brought displacement and destruction. The story of Interstate 40 in the South is not just about the big cities. It is also about the small towns that were bypassed. When the highway was built, planners chose routes that would avoid the congested main streets of places like Dixon, Tennessee, or Siler City, North Carolina. They built the new road a few miles outside town, with an exit that led to a country road. At first, local merchants thought this would be a death sentence. Without the traffic passing through, how would they survive? But then something unexpected happened. New businesses appeared at the exit: a gas station, a motel, a fast food restaurant. Soon, a whole new commercial strip developed around the interchange, and the old downtown continued to decline. The pattern repeated itself all across the South. The interstate created a new geography of commerce, one based on the car, not on the town square. The exit became the new center of gravity. In time, the highway itself became a kind of character in the story of the South. It was the road that country singers wrote about, that truckers cursed, that families drove on vacation. It was the route of the moving van, the ambulance, the delivery truck. It was the path that connected Memphis to Nashville to Knoxville to Asheville to Winston-Salem. It was the spine of the Sun Belt, the artery that pumped life into the suburbs and the industrial parks. And it was also the source of constant debate. Environmentalists fought against expansions that would widen the road through sensitive wetlands. Historians fought to preserve the old alignments that had been abandoned. And the people who lived near the highway learned to live with the sound of traffic, a constant hum that was both a nuisance and a sign of life. As you drive along Interstate 40 today, you might notice the signs of change everywhere. The exits are lined with chain stores and fast food restaurants that look the same in Tennessee as they do in Texas. The small towns that once had their own character have become interchangeable. The old farms are now subdivisions with names like Oak Ridge Estates and Magnolia Gardens. But if you look closely, you can still see traces of the past. A crumbling barn stands in a field just beyond the fence line. A historic marker tells the story of a battle fought nearby. A weathered sign advertises a motel that closed its doors years ago. The highway has rewritten the landscape, but it has not erased everything. The Old South still exists, hidden in plain sight, just off the exit ramp. This is the opening segment of our journey along the road that changed the American South. In the next part, we will travel back in time to the earliest days of the interstate system, when politicians and engineers dreamed of a highway that would unite the nation. We will meet the people who fought for the road and the people who fought against it. We will walk through the neighborhoods that were lost and celebrate the communities that were born. We will hear the stories of truck drivers and waitresses, of preachers and politicians, of farmers and factory workers. And we will try to understand what this highway has done to the land and the people who live along it. The road is long and the story is deep. But before we go any further, let us take a moment to think about the road itself. How did it come to be? Who decided where it would go? And what did it cost, in dollars and in human terms, to build it? That is where we will begin next time. For now, we leave you with the sound of tires on asphalt, the hum of a long journey ahead. This is the highway that changed the American South. To understand how the highway came to be, we have to go back to a time before the concrete and the cloverleafs, back to the 1950s, when America was still a nation of two-lane roads and railroad crossings. The interstate system was born out of a mix of military strategy, economic ambition, and a profound faith in the power of the automobile. President Dwight D. Eisenhower is often called the father of the interstate, and it is true that he pushed the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 through Congress with relentless determination. But Eisenhower's vision did not come from Washington. It came from a muddy, bone-rattling cross-country journey he made in 1919, when he was a young Army officer assigned to lead a military convoy from Washington, D.C., to San Francisco. The convoy took 62 days to cover 3,000 miles. Trucks broke down, bridges collapsed, roads turned to rivers of mud. The experience convinced Eisenhower that a modern, efficient highway system was essential for national defense. If the United States ever faced an invasion, the military needed to be able to move troops and equipment quickly across the continent. The old roads would not do. 37 years later, Eisenhower signed the Interstate Highway Act into law. It was the largest public works project in American history. The federal government would pay for 90% of the cost, with the states picking up the remaining 10%. The goal was to build 41,000 miles of limited-access highways, connecting every major city in the country. The South, with its predominantly rural landscape and its growing population, stood to benefit enormously. But the decision about where exactly to put the roads was left largely to state highway departments, and those departments were staffed by engineers and politicians who had their own ideas about what constituted progress. In the South, those ideas were often shaped by the same forces that had shaped the region for generations: the desire for economic development, the power of local elites, and the deep, unspoken assumptions of racial segregation. The first interstates in the South were designed to connect the region's major cities. I-40 would eventually stretch from Barstow, California, to Wilmington, North Carolina, but its most critical segment ran through the heart of Tennessee, from Memphis to Nashville to Knoxville. I-70 would carry travelers from Michigan all the way to Florida, cutting through the Appalachian foothills of Georgia and Tennessee. I-80 would link Atlanta to the industrial Piedmont of the Carolinas. These roads were planned with the logic of a map, not the logic of a community. They were drawn as straight lines between points, and the straightest line often went through the poorest neighborhoods, the cheapest land, the paths of least resistance. In city after city, the interstate became a moat that separated the privileged from the dispossessed. Consider the case of the old black business district in Nashville, known as Jefferson Street. Before the interstate, Jefferson Street was a vibrant corridor of African-American life. There were jazz clubs and barbershops, restaurants and funeral homes, doctors' offices and insurance agencies. It was a place where black entrepreneurs could thrive in a Jim Crow world because they served a captive market. When the planners decided to run I-40 through that corridor, they argued that the area was blighted and that the highway would bring renewal. But renewal meant demolition. Whole blocks were wiped out. The Tennessee A and I University campus was cut off from the rest of the community. The sound of music and laughter was replaced by the roar of diesel engines. The people who lived there were given relocation assistance, but it was never enough. Many ended up in public housing projects that were isolated from jobs and services. The highway had not renewed their neighborhood, it had amputated it. The same story played out in Memphis, where I-40 sliced through the working-class black community of Binghamton. In Atlanta, the connector where I-70 and I-80 merged through downtown became a concrete canyon that divided the city. In Durham, North Carolina, the highway plowed through the Haiti district, once known as the Black Wall Street of the South. In Birmingham, the highway cut a swath through the black neighborhoods of the city's west side. In each case, the justification was the same: urban renewal, progress, economic development. But the effect was to reinforce the very patterns of segregation that the civil rights movement was challenging. The highway became a physical barrier that kept poor black residents away from the resources of the white downtown. It was not just a road, it was a wall, but the story of the interstate is not only about destruction, it is also about creation. The highway opened up new frontiers for the Southern economy. Take the example of the furniture industry in North Carolina. For decades, the furniture makers of High Point and Hickory had shipped their products by rail. Rail was slow and expensive. When I-80 and I-40 were built, trucking companies could deliver a sofa from North Carolina to a furniture store in Texas in 2 days instead of a week. the cost of transportation dropped dramatically. Suddenly, it made sense for furniture factories to expand, to hire more workers to build new plants. The same thing happened with textiles, with auto parts, with electronics. The interstate turned the South into a distribution hub. Companies like Walmart and FedEx started in the South, and they grew because they could ship goods cheaply and quickly along the interstates. The highway made the Sun Belt possible. And then there were the truckers. They are the highway's most dedicated disciples. They live on the road, eat at truck stops, sleep in sleeper cabs. They know every grade and every curve of I-40. They can tell you where the best coffee is in Oklahoma City and where the worst traffic is in Knoxville. The trucker culture that grew up along the interstates is a uniquely American phenomenon. It has its own language, its own code of conduct, its own heroes and legends. In the 1970s, a trucker named C.W. McCall had a hit song called Convoy that celebrated the camaraderie of the road. The song described a line of 18-wheelers rolling down the highway, evading the police and sticking together. It was a fantasy, but it captured something real, the sense of freedom that the highway gave to people who spent their lives on it. For many truckers, the road was a way to escape the narrow confines of small-town life, to see the country, to make a decent living. The highway was their workplace, their home, their church. But the freedom of the road came with a price. Truck drivers spend long hours alone, away from their families. They face dangers from fatigue, from weather, from reckless drivers. And they carry the weight of the nation's economy on their shoulders. Everything you buy, from the phone in your pocket to the food on your table, probably spent some time on a truck. The interstate system made that delivery possible, but it also created a system that demands speed and efficiency at all costs. Truckers are under constant pressure to meet deadlines, to drive longer hours, to push through exhaustion. The highway that opened up the South also put a strain on the people who traveled it day after day. Let us now turn to the environmental cost. Building 41,000 miles of highway required an enormous amount of concrete and asphalt. The construction of I-40 through the Great Smoky Mountains, for example, involved blasting through rock, carving up hillsides, and filling valleys. The highway cut through some of the most beautiful landscapes in America. Environmentalists fought to preserve the natural beauty of the region, but they were often overruled by the power of the highway lobby. The result is that today, driving through the mountains on I-40, you see the scars left by the construction. The road is a marvel of engineering, but it is also a wound in the landscape. The runoff from the pavement carries oil and chemicals into streams. The noise of the traffic disturbs the wildlife. The highway has changed the ecology of the South in ways that we are still trying to understand. And yet, even with all these costs, the interstate system has been a net benefit to the region. It has lifted millions of people out of poverty. It has connected the isolated corners of the South to the rest of the nation. It has allowed families to visit each other across state lines. It has made it possible for people to pursue opportunities that would have been unimaginable a generation earlier. The highway is a symbol of progress, but progress is never pure. It always comes with a price. Let us talk about the people who built the highway. They were mostly men, often from rural areas, who worked for construction companies that bid on government contracts. They operated bulldozers and cranes and paving machines. They worked in the heat of the southern summer and the chill of the southern winter. They lived in temporary camps near the construction sites, far from their families. Building a highway is hard, dangerous work. Accidents were common. Many men were killed in cave-ins, in falls, in collisions with heavy equipment. The highway was built with their labor and their blood. And when the work was done, they moved on to the next project, leaving behind a ribbon of concrete that would outlast them all. We must also remember the people who were displaced, not just the homeowners and the business owners, but the entire communities that were uprooted. In some cases, the highway planners offered compensation for property, but it was often based on the assessed value of the land, not on the emotional value of a home or the economic value of a business. People were forced to leave the places where they had grown up, where their parents had lived, where their children had played. They scattered to other neighborhoods, other towns, other states. The bonds of community were broken. The highway did not just move people, it scattered them like seeds in the wind. And then there are the stories of those who stayed. The people who live next to the highway, who hear the traffic day and night, who breathe the exhaust fumes, who watch the trucks roar past at 70 miles an hour. They have learned to adapt. They built fences and planted trees to block the noise. They installed air conditioning so they could keep their windows closed. They learned to sleep through the rumble. For some, the highway became a part of their identity. They were the people who lived at exit 23, near the truck stop, near the motel that had seen better days. The highway defined their address, their livelihood, their sense of place. Consider the waitress at a truck stop diner in a town called Lebanon, Tennessee, just off I-40. She has been working there for 20 years. She knows the regulars by name. She knows which truckers like their coffee black and which ones want cream. She hears stories from all over the country, stories of long hauls and lonely nights, of breakdowns and near misses. The highway brought these people to her diner, and she became a part of their journey. Without the interstate, her diner would not exist. She is a product of the road, just as much as the concrete and the steel. Or consider the preacher at a small church in a town that was bypassed by the highway. His congregation has shrunk over the years. The young people moved away to the cities, where the jobs are. The old people are dying. The church building is in need of repair. He preaches to a handful of faithful souls every Sunday. The highway did not pass through his town, so his town withered. He knows that if the interstate had come this way, things might have been different. But he also knows that the highway would have brought its own challenges. The noise, the traffic, the chain stores that would have put the local businesses out of work. He is caught between two visions of the South, the old and the new, and he is not sure which one is better. The interstate system also changed the way Southerners think about distance. Before the highway, a trip from Nashville to Memphis was an all-day affair on winding two-lane roads. Now it takes just over 3 hours on I-40. The region shrank. People could live in a small town and work in a big city. They could drive to the beach for the weekend. They could attend a university far from home and still visit their parents on holidays. Distance became a matter of minutes, not miles. The highway made the South smaller, and in doing so, it made it more homogeneous. The distinct local cultures of the region began to blur. A Waffle House in Georgia looks the same as a Waffle House in Mississippi. A Walmart in Alabama looks the same as a Walmart in Tennessee. The interstate is the great homogenizer, spreading the same brands, the same architecture, the same signs across the landscape. And yet, for all that sameness, the South remains a place of deep cultural roots. The highway did not erase those roots. It just buried them under a layer of asphalt. You can still find the old ways if you know where to look. You can get off the interstate and drive down a country road and discover a mom-and-pop barbecue joint where the pitmaster has been smoking pork for 40 years. You can find a general store that sells feed and seed and remembers your name. You can find a church with a hand-painted sign that announces the homecoming picnic. The interstate may be the main artery, but the capillaries of the South still carry the blood of tradition. We should also talk about the highway's role in the civil rights movement. The interstate provided a way for activists to move quickly and efficiently between cities. In 1961, the Freedom Riders traveled by bus along the interstates to challenge segregation in bus terminals. In 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. and his supporters used the interstates to travel from Selma to Montgomery for the Voting Rights March. The highway made it possible to organize protests across state lines, to bring together people from different communities, to spread the message of equality. But the highway also facilitated the resistance to integration. Segregationists used the interstates to move quickly, too. In some cases, the highway provided a way for state police to intercept protesters, to block roads, to enforce the old order. The highway was a tool, not a moral force. It could be used for good or for ill. Let us not forget the economic transformation that the highway brought to agricultural communities. Before the interstate, farmers had to truck their crops to market on slow, narrow roads. By the time the produce arrived, it was often wilted or bruised. The interstate allowed farmers to ship their goods quickly and cheaply to faraway markets. A tomato grown in Florida could be on a grocery store shelf in Chicago within days, but this efficiency came with a cost. Small family farms could not compete with the large industrial farms that had the capital to take advantage of the highway. The interstate accelerated the trend toward consolidation in agriculture. The number of farms in the South declined, as did the number of people living on farms. The rural landscape changed. Fields gave way to subdivisions. Cows grazed next to the off-ramps. The highway changed not just the way people traveled, but the very land itself. And so we continue our journey along I-40. We are only at the beginning of the story. There are many more miles to cover, many more voices to hear. In the next segment, we will travel deeper into the history of the highway, meeting the engineers who designed the bridges and the tunnels, the politicians who fought for funding, the activists who protested the displacement of their communities. We will explore the environmental impact of the road, the wildlife that has been displaced, the air quality that has been degraded. We will also celebrate the wild beauty of the highway, the way it cuts through the mountains and the forests, the way it reveals the sweep of the southern landscape. We will listen to the stories of the people who live and work along the road, from the truck stop waitress to the convenience store clerk to the state trooper. And we will ask ourselves, what does it mean to live in a world built for the car? What have we gained and what have we lost? The road is long and the answers are not simple. But that is the nature of a journey. You never know what you will find around the next curve. So keep your eyes on the road, keep your hands on the wheel, and let us drive on. This is the highway that changed the American South. We are only partway through our journey, and the highway has already revealed so much about the South it reshaped. But to understand its full impact, we must now turn to the land itself, to the rivers and mountains and forests that were carved and bridged and tunneled through. The interstate system was an engineering marvel, but it was also an act of profound violence against the natural world. In the Tennessee Valley, the construction of I-40 through the Great Smoky Mountains required blasting through solid rock, dynamiting ancient ridges to make way for a 4-lane ribbon of asphalt. The contractors used giant earth movers that chewed through the hills like a hungry beast. They diverted streams, filled in wetlands, and rerouted rivers. In some places, they buried entire creeks beneath the roadbed, so that today you can hear the sound of water rushing underground if you stand still at certain exits. The highway did not just connect places, it fundamentally altered the geography of the region. It flattened what was once uneven. It straightened what was once winding. It brought a kind of geometric order to a landscape that had been shaped by centuries of natural forces. Consider the case of the Pigeon River, which flows through North Carolina and Tennessee. Before the interstate, the river meandered freely through valleys and gorges, supporting a rich ecosystem of fish, birds, and aquatic plants. When I-40 was built along its banks, the construction sent tons of sediment into the water, choking the riverbed and killing off sensitive species. The runoff from the road itself contained oil, heavy metals, and salt from winter de-icing, all of which leached into the groundwater and streams. The state tried to mitigate the damage by building retention ponds and planting vegetation along the slopes, but the natural balance was forever altered. Today, the Pigeon River still shows signs of that disruption. The fish that remain are the hardy ones, the ones that can tolerate pollution. The rare species have retreated to isolated remnants of their former habitat. The interstate brought the world to the mountains, but it also brought the world's toxins. The impact on wildlife was not limited to rivers. The highway created a barrier, a long linear scar that animals had to cross at their peril. Deer, bears, and even small creatures like turtles and salamanders were killed by the thousands each year. Biologists tried to design underpasses and overpasses to allow animals to move safely from one side to the other, but these were expensive and rarely built in the early years. In the Smokies, black bears often wandered onto the road, drawn by the smell of garbage from passing cars or by the edges of forest that came right up to the pavement. They were struck by vehicles, their bodies left to rot on the shoulder. Even today you see the signs, bear crossing with a silhouette of a bear. But the signs are no match for a semi-truck going 70 miles per hour. The highway became a deadly obstacle course for the creatures of the South. And yet, for all the destruction, there is also a strange kind of beauty to the interstate. From the air, it looks like a modern aqueduct, carrying a ceaseless flow of metal and glass across the countryside. At night, the headlights create a ribbon of light that stretches to the horizon. The engineers who designed the route chose scenic overlooks where travelers can pull off and gaze at valleys and rivers. There are rest stops with picnic tables and informational signs about the history of the area. In Virginia, the interstate passes through the Blue Ridge Mountains, and in the fall, the leaves turn vibrant shades of red and orange and yellow. The highway becomes a moving gallery of nature's splendor. It is easy to forget in those moments the cost of that beauty, but the cost is always there, buried in the bedrock, in the concrete, in the memories of the families who lost their homes. We should also talk about the interstate's role in the rise of the modern southern city. Atlanta is the most obvious example. Before the interstate, Atlanta was a regional hub, a railroad center that had grown steadily since the Civil War, but the interstates made it a national destination. I-75 and I-85 converge in the heart of the city, and I-20 runs east-west through the metropolitan area. These highways allowed people to live in sprawling suburbs and commute downtown for work. The population exploded. The city annexed new land, built new neighborhoods, and attracted businesses from all over the country. The skyline changed. Glass towers replaced low-rise brick buildings. The highways cut through existing communities, dividing them into islands separated by concrete barriers. In the 1970s and 1980s, the interstates facilitated the flight of white residents to the suburbs, leaving the inner city to become predominantly African American and increasingly impoverished. The highway was a tool of segregation, even as it promised integration through mobility. The same roads that allowed black workers to reach jobs in white neighborhoods also allowed white families to flee those neighborhoods. Nowhere is this more evident than in the case of Yatefiv through the Sweet Auburn district of Atlanta. Sweet Auburn was once the cultural and economic heart of Black Atlanta, home to Martin Luther King Jr., and a thriving corridor of businesses, churches, and social organizations. In the 1960s, the interstate was routed directly through the neighborhood, cutting it in half. Homes and businesses were demolished. The community's fabric was torn. King's own birthplace was spared, but the neighborhood around it was devastated. The highway acted like a moat, separating the black community from the rest of the city. Today, Sweet Auburn has struggled to recover. Visitors come to see the King Center and the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church, but they do not linger. The roar of traffic is a constant reminder of the trade-offs that were made in the name of progress, but let us not paint the highway as a purely villainous force. It also brought opportunity. In Huntsville, Alabama, the interstate made it possible for engineers and scientists to commute to the Marshall Space Flight Center. The city grew from a sleepy cotton town to a hub of aerospace innovation. In Charlotte, North Carolina, the intersection of I-77 and Yatefiv turned a modest textile city into a banking powerhouse. In Nashville, the music industry was transformed by the easy movement of artists and fans along the interstates. The Grand Ole Opry was relocated from downtown to a new complex near the interstate, making it accessible to tourists from all over the country. The highway brought people, money, and culture into the South, while also exporting Southern culture to the rest of America. Think of how country music spread along the interstates. Truckers carried tapes and CDs from one state to the next. They brought the twang of a steel guitar to truck stops in Ohio and Indiana. The highway became a conduit for the Southern sound. And then there is the food. The interstate spawned a whole new cuisine of roadside dining. Fast food chains like McDonald's, Burger King, and KFC planted their flags at every interchange, but also local restaurants thrived. The Waffle House was born in the South and expanded along the interstates, offering a consistent menu of hash browns and waffles to weary travelers. The Cracker Barrel, with its rocking chairs and gift shop, became a fixture at exits across the region. These places are not just restaurants, they are gathering spots, places where strangers share a table and a story. The Truck Stop Diner is a democratic institution. The waitress calls you honey. The cook yells orders from the grill. The jukebox plays Hank Williams. The interstate made these places possible by funneling millions of customers past their doors, but the interstate also killed the older roads. The once bustling U.S. Route 11, which paralleled Gaton through Virginia and Tennessee, fell into disuse. Motels that had catered to travelers on the two-lane road saw their business dry up. They became flophouses or were abandoned altogether. The same happened along U.S. Route 41 in Georgia, which was the main north-south route before I-75. Today, you can drive those old highways and see the ghost signs of motels and cafes that have been closed for decades. The interstate did not just create new commerce, it destroyed old commerce. The economic winners were the cities near the interchanges, and the losers were the small towns that were bypassed. Take the town of Lynchburg, Tennessee, home of the Jack Daniel's distillery. Before the interstate, the distillery was a major tourist attraction, but it was difficult to reach. The roads were narrow and winding. Then I-24 was built, and a new exit was constructed just a few miles from the distillery. Tourists could now reach Lynchburg in a fraction of the time, but the interstate also bypassed the town itself. Visitors drove straight to the distillery and left without stopping in the historic square. The downtown businesses struggled. The hardware store closed. The clothing store closed. The old drugstore with its soda fountain became a memory. The town's identity became subsumed by the brand of whiskey. It is a classic story of the interstate. It can bring attention but also divert it, concentrate it in one spot while leaving the surrounding area to wither. We must also consider the role of the interstate in the rise of the Sun Belt. The highway made the South accessible to retirees from the North. They came to Florida and Arizona and Texas, but they also settled in the Carolinas and Tennessee. They built retirement communities with names like Sun City and Heritage Hills. They demanded golf courses and hospitals and shopping centers. The interstate allowed them to maintain ties with their children and grandchildren up north. They could drive back for holidays and family reunions. The South became a destination, not just a pass-through. This demographic shift changed the politics of the region. Newcomers brought their own values, their own voting patterns. The conservative South became even more conservative in some ways, but also more diverse in others. The interstate accelerated the mixing of populations, blurring the lines between Yankee and rebel. And then there is the matter of the interstate's impact on the military. The South has always been home to many military bases. The highways made it possible to move troops and equipment quickly from one base to another. In the event of a national emergency, the interstates were designed to serve as emergency runways for military aircraft. Some stretches of 8-5 in Georgia and I-10 in Florida were built with long, straight sections that could be used for landing and takeoff. The highway was a component of national defense. During the Cold War, it was seen as a way to evacuate cities in the event of a nuclear attack. The South, with its strategic location and its many bases, was a key part of this network. The interstate system was never just a civilian project, it was a military asset. But let us not forget the toll highways. Not all interstates in the South are free. There are toll roads like the Florida Turnpike, which was built before the interstate system but later incorporated into it. The Turnpike connected Miami to Orlando and eventually to the rest of the state. It was a faster, more efficient route, but it required drivers to pay. This created a two-tier system. Those who could afford the toll could save time. Those who could not had to take the slower, congested local roads. The Turnpike exacerbated inequalities even as it promised progress. Today, the debate over toll roads continues, with new proposals for express lanes and managed lanes that charge higher prices during peak hours. The highway has become a commodity, a product to be bought and sold. Now we come to the human stories that are often forgotten in the grand narrative of infrastructure. In the small town of Florence, South Carolina, there is a man named James who has lived his whole life near the intersection of I-20 and US 3's Route. He is in his 70s now. He remembers when the interstate was built through his family's farm. He was a boy, helping his father move the cattle to a new pasture. He watched the bulldozers push down the old barn. The highway cut the farm in two. After that, his father sold the land to a developer who built a truck stop. James still lives in the house where he was born, which sits on a narrow strip of land between the interstate and the frontage road. He can hear the trucks all night. He says he has learned to sleep with the noise, that it sounds like rain now. But in his quieter moments, he remembers the silence of the farm, the sound of crickets and wind in the cornfield. He does not resent the highway. He says it brought jobs and people. But he also says that something was lost. He is not sure what to call it. Maybe it was peace. There are countless stories like James's up and down the interstates. Every exit, every bridge, every mile marker has a memory attached. The concrete and the steel are not just materials, they are repositories of lived experience. The highway is a stage, and we are all actors on it. The trucker who has driven the same route for 30 years knows every curve, every police speed trap, every diner with good coffee. The mother driving her children to visit grandparents knows the rest stops where they can stretch their legs. The college student driving home for the holidays knows the traffic patterns, which exits to avoid, which radio stations play the best music. The highway becomes a part of our personal geography, as familiar as the streets of our hometown. And so we drive on. We pass through the rolling hills of the Piedmont, the flatlands of the coastal plain, the swamps of the Gulf Coast. The scenery changes, but the road remains constant. It is a ribbon of sameness in a landscape of diversity. The interstate has a kind of monotony, a hypnotic rhythm that lulls the driver into a trance. The white lines on the black asphalt, the green signs with white letters, the rumble strips at the edge of the shoulder. It is a world of rules and boundaries, but within that structure there is freedom. The freedom to go anywhere, to leave behind the familiar and embrace the unknown. That is the promise of the highway, the promise that has driven Americans for generations. Yet we must ask, at what cost? The environment has paid a price. The communities that were divided have paid a price. The people who lost their homes have paid a price. The highway is not a neutral technology. It is a powerful force that rearranges the world around it. The South that emerged from the interstate era is a different place than the one that entered it. It is faster, richer, more connected, but also more fragmented, more homogenized, more dependent on the automobile. We live in a world built for the car, and the car has shaped our habits, our aspirations, our very sense of self. Consider the concept of road trips. Before the interstate, a road trip was an adventure, a journey full of unexpected detours and local encounters. Now it is a smooth, efficient commute. You can drive from Nashville to Dallas without ever leaving the interstate system. You can stop at the same chain restaurants, the same chain hotels, the same chain gas stations. The experience is predictable. The highway has stripped the journey of its serendipity, but for many people, that predictability is a blessing. They want to know what they are getting. They want reliability. The highway offers that, and in offering it, it has transformed the way we travel. As we continue our drive, we come to the Delta region of Mississippi. Here, the interstate cuts through the flat, fertile land that was once plantation territory. the blues were born here. The highway brought tourists to the birthplace of the blues, but it also brought Walmart and McDonald's. In Clarksdale, the intersection of Highway 61 and Highway 49 is famous as the crossroads where Robert Johnson supposedly sold his soul to the devil. But now the interstate has shifted traffic away from that crossroads. The historic blues clubs struggle to survive. The highway can be both a magnet and a repellent. We are now approaching the Louisiana border. The interstate crosses the Mississippi River on a massive bridge. From the bridge, you can see the river in all its muddy majesty. The highway has changed the relationship between the South and its great rivers. Before the interstate, rivers were barriers, places where you had to stop and wait for a ferry or find a bridge that was often many miles away. The interstate made rivers just another thing to cross, a brief moment of wonder before the road continues. The river is no longer an obstacle, it is a landmark, but the highway has also had negative effects on the river. The runoff from the roads pollutes the water. The bridges can disrupt the flow of sediment and affect wildlife. The river, like the land, has been reshaped by the needs of the automobile. We are nearing the end of our journey, but not quite. There is still much to consider. The highway's role in the rise of the Sun Belt, in the decline of the Rust Belt, in the reshaping of the American economy. The interstate system cost billions of dollars, but it generated trillions in economic activity. It is the single largest public works project in American history, and it is showing its age. The concrete is crumbling, the bridges are failing, the maintenance costs are enormous. The South, like the rest of the country, is facing a crisis of infrastructure. The roads that once symbolized progress are now symbols of decay. Potholes, cracks, rusted guardrails. The highway that changed the South is now in need of change itself. But even as we worry about the future, we can appreciate the past. The highway brought us together, even as it drove us apart. It gave us mobility, even as it took away community. It is a paradox, a concrete contradiction. And as we drive the last few miles, we realize that the journey is not over. The highway continues, through the night, through the dawn, through the decades. It is a living thing, always changing, always carrying people to new destinations. The South is still being shaped by the interstate, and we are all travelers on this road. But as we drive, the environment itself tells a different story. The interstate is not merely a ribbon of asphalt. It is a wound in the landscape, a scar that runs for thousands of miles. The rain that falls on the pavement does not soak into the ground. It runs off, carrying oil, antifreeze, tire residue, and heavy metals into the nearest creek, the nearest river, the nearest bayou. In the coastal marshes of Louisiana, where the interstates cross fragile wetlands, the runoff has contributed to the slow death of the grasses that hold the land together. The highway brings people to the coast, but it also accelerates the erosion that is swallowing the coastline inch by inch. The engineers who designed these roads did not think about the long-term effects on the water table, on the fish, on the birds that feed on the insects that breed in the ditches. They thought about speed, about efficiency, about connecting one city to another. And so the highway became a conduit not only for cars but for pollution, a river of poison that flows silently beneath the wheels of every passing truck. Consider the heat. On a summer day in Atlanta, the asphalt of the interstate can reach temperatures of 140 degrees Fahrenheit. That heat radiates into the surrounding neighborhoods, raising the ambient temperature by as much as 10 degrees. The highway acts as a heat sink, a long strip of artificial desert that intensifies the urban heat island effect. The trees that once shaded the corridors have been cut down, replaced by concrete barriers and sound walls. The shade is gone. The cool breezes that used to flow through the valleys are blocked by the elevated roadbeds. In cities like Birmingham and Memphis, the interstates have created microclimates of their own, zones of heat and noise that make the adjacent homes uninhabitable without air conditioning. And so the residents run their air conditioners, which pump more heat into the air, which makes the highway even hotter. It is a vicious cycle, one that the engineers never anticipated. They saw the highway as a solution to congestion, not as a contributor to climate change. And then there is the wildlife. The interstate is a barrier that animals cannot cross. The forests that once were continuous have been bisected. The deer, the bears, the coyotes, the foxes are trapped on one side or the other. They venture onto the highway at their peril. In the Smoky Mountains, the interstates have cut off traditional migration routes for black bears. In the Florida Panhandle, the roads have isolated populations of the endangered red-cockaded woodpecker. The animals that try to cross are killed by the thousands. Roadkill is a familiar sight on the interstate, but we rarely think of what it means. Each carcass represents a lost life, a broken food chain, a genetic line that will never reproduce. The highway is a predator in its own right, a silent killer that operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In some places, wildlife crossings have been built, tunnels and overpasses that allow animals to pass safely. But these are rare, expensive, and often ignored by the animals. The highway remains a wall, a moat of asphalt that divides the natural world. The interstate has also reshaped the way we think about disasters. In 2005, when Hurricane Katrina slammed into the Gulf Coast, the interstates became the lifeline for the evacuation of New Orleans. I-10 and I-5 were clogged with cars, a river of humanity fleeing the storm. The highways that had been built to facilitate commerce and travel became the routes of survival. But the evacuation was a disaster in its own right. The interstates could not handle the volume of traffic. People sat for hours, running out of gas, running out of water, running out of hope. The elderly, the poor, the disabled were left behind because they did not have cars. The interstate system, designed for the automobile, failed those who could not afford one. The images of the Superdome, of the convention center, of people stranded on rooftops are seared into our collective memory. And yet, in the years since, the interstates have been widened, but the fundamental problem remains. The highway is not a tool for equity. It is a tool for those who have the means to use it. Now consider the transformation of rural economies. In the small town of Macon, Georgia, the intersection of I-5 and I-16 has become a hub for distribution centers. Amazon, Home Depot, UPS all have warehouses there. The interstate brings in the trucks, and the trucks bring in the goods, and the goods are shipped out to the rest of the Southeast. The town has grown, but the growth has been uneven. The jobs are low-paying, the hours are long, the workers are often temp employees with no benefits. The warehouses are enormous, windowless structures that sit on acres of concrete. The interstate has brought money, but it has also brought a kind of soullessness. The old downtown, with its brick buildings and family-owned stores, has been hollowed out. The people who work in the warehouses do not live in Macon. They commute from 30 miles away, or they live in trailer parks on the outskirts of town. The highway has turned the town into a node in a global supply chain, but it has not given the town a sense of place. The interstate is a machine, and the people are its cogs. We have seen this pattern repeated across the South. In the Piedmont region of North Carolina, the I-5 has turned the corridor from Greensboro to Charlotte into a continuous strip of warehouses, truck stops, and fast food joints. In Alabama, I-5 has done the same from Huntsville to Mobile. The interstate has created a landscape of monotony, a geography of sameness. You can drive through 5 states and see the same billboards, the same gas stations, the same chain restaurants. The local flavor has been leached out, replaced by a kind of corporate homogeneity. The highway is a leveler, a force that erases differences. It brings the outside world in, but it also pushes the local world out. The diner that served homemade biscuits for 50 years cannot compete with the McDonald's that can serve 1,000 customers an hour. The motel with the neon sign and the swimming pool is no match for the Hampton Inn with its loyalty program and its standardized rooms. The interstate has standardized the South, even as it has connected it, but we must not fall into the trap of nostalgia. The Old South was not a paradise. It was a place of segregation, of poverty, of limited opportunity. The interstate helped break down those barriers. It brought people from different races and classes together, at least on the road. It made it possible for a black family from Alabama to drive to Chicago without having to stop at a segregated motel. It made it possible for a white family from Georgia to visit the Grand Canyon. The highway did not solve racism, but it created a shared space where people had to interact, where the rules of the road applied to everyone. The highway was a democratic space, a place where a millionaire in a Mercedes and a laborer in a pickup truck shared the same pavement. It was not perfect, but it was a start, and so we continue our drive, the miles rolling by, the sun setting in the rearview mirror. We pass through the outskirts of Montgomery, past the old bus station where Rosa Parks was arrested. The interstate bypasses the city center, cutting through the neighborhoods that were once the heart of the civil rights movement. The highway has made it easy to skip the history, to drive past the places that matter without ever stopping. But the highway has also brought tourists to the Legacy Museum and the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. It is a double-edged sword, as always. The interstate gives and it takes away. It connects and it divides. It empowers and it exploits. We are now entering the final stretch of our journey. The interstates of the American South have changed everything. They have changed the land, the economy, the culture, the ecology, the very fabric of human life. They are a monument to human ambition, a testament to our ability to reshape the world to our will. But they are also a warning. The concrete and steel that we lay down will outlast us. The highways will remain, even as our cars change, even as our fuels change, even as our cities change. The interstate system is a legacy, a gift to the future, but also a burden. The maintenance costs are staggering. The environmental costs are incalculable. The social costs are still being counted. And yet, as we pull off at the last exit, as we park the car and step out into the night, we feel a strange affection for the road. It has been our companion, our guide, our home for the past few hours. The highway is not just a thing, it is a story. The story of the South, the story of America, the story of our own lives. Every mile marker is a memory. Every overpass is a threshold. The highway that changed the American South is still changing. It is a work in progress, a living narrative that we are all writing together. And as we walk away from the car, we know that we will return to the road tomorrow, because the road is always there, waiting. It does not sleep. It does not rest. It just carries on, carrying us through the night and into the dawn. And that is the truth of the highway. It is never finished. It is always leading somewhere, and we are always travelers. And now, as we stand at the edge of the pavement, the hum of the interstate still vibrating in our bones, we must ask what comes next. The highway that changed the American South is itself being changed. Climate change is reshaping the coastline, and with it, the roads that hug the shore. In Louisiana, parts of 010 are sinking, the marshland giving way to saltwater. The same interstates that carried evacuees from Katrina are now threatened by the very waters they helped people flee. Engineers are raising bridges, reinforcing levees, but the ocean is patient. It will keep rising. The highway, built to last 50 years, may not see 100. In Miami, where I-95 runs along the eastern edge of the city, king tides already lap at the asphalt. The interstate is not eternal. It is vulnerable, just like the communities it serves. Consider the rise of the electric vehicle, the quiet revolution that is coming. The interstates were built for gasoline, for the internal combustion engine, for the roar of diesel trucks. But the future is silent, powered by batteries. The rest stops that once smelled of exhaust and coffee will need charging stations, thousands of them, each one a small power plant. The grid that feeds the highway will have to be rebuilt. The oil companies that funded the construction of the modern South will fade, their refineries rusting, their pipelines abandoned. The highway will still be there, but the cars will be different. And with automation, the driver will become a passenger. The trucker, that icon of the open road, will be replaced by algorithms. The highway will become a conveyor belt, moving goods and people without human hands on the wheel. What will that mean for the small towns that depend on truck stops, on diners, on motels? It will be another disruption, another wave of change. But there is also a quiet rebellion. In cities across the South, from Atlanta to Nashville to Charlotte, there is a movement to reclaim the highway, not by tearing it down, but by building over it. Parks are being built on top of interstates, stitching neighborhoods back together. In Dallas, the Clyde Warren Park covers a sunken highway, turning a divide into a gathering place. In Atlanta, the Beltline is transforming an old railway corridor into a loop of trails and transit, offering an alternative to the car. The interstate is no longer the only option. The people are beginning to choose another way. They want to walk, to bike, to ride the train. They want to see their neighbors, not just their fellow travelers. The highway that changed the American South is now being changed by the American South. It is a slow process, a quiet revolution, but it is happening. And so the road is not a static thing. It is a living system, responding to our needs, our failures, our hopes. The interstate system was built on a promise of freedom, but freedom is not just the ability to drive fast. It is the ability to choose. And the choices we make now will determine what the highway becomes. Will it remain a lifeline, or will it become a relic? Will it serve the few or the many? The answers are not written in concrete. They are written in the decisions we make every day, in the miles we drive, in the places we stop. As we stand here, the night air cool on our faces, the stars beginning to appear above the glow of the streetlights, we realize that the journey is never over. The highway that changed the American South is still changing, and we are part of that change. Every time we get behind the wheel, we add another line to the story. Every time we take an exit, we choose a destination. The road is a mirror reflecting who we are and who we want to be. It is a challenge, a promise, a memory. The concrete and steel are not just infrastructure, they are the bones of a civilization. And like any living thing, the highway grows, adapts, and eventually decays. But for now it is here, stretching out before us, waiting for the next traveler, the next story, the next dawn. The engine turns over, the headlights cut through the dark, and we drive on.